My name is Dan Levin. I'm the Vice President of Energy Markets for Bright Power. We are a full-service energy management firm with 80 people based in New York and California. We offer an array of services. One of them falls under my group, which is energy procurement. So we advise our clients on how to buy energy, electricity, natural gas, fuel oils on a national basis, although as a company we are more heavily focused in the New York market. Beyond the procurement services, we have energy engineers, we do energy audits, we do local law 87, 84 compliance here in New York City. We do new construction, energy efficiency work, including recommissioning, retrofitting, and we're probably the largest large multifamily solar installer in the city of New York. So we kind of have a very wide swath of experience. Today I'm going to talk to you about energy procurement, particularly how it relates to dual fuel. If everybody has the handout, I'm going to kind of walk you through some general ideas of what's going on in the energy market, although I would think that you pretty much have to be under a rock not to know that we've had prices collapse in a lot of markets. Let me start with oil, although that's not one of the commodities we actually do a lot of because most of our clients are burning a lot more natural gas and we're using a lot more electricity than oil. But that said, and some of the reasons should be that a few years back oil was not competitive to natural gas. We're now seeing, and actually I gave you guys kind of a neat table here, the big overall picture on pretty much every energy commodity, and that's because the underlying fuels have got inexpensive, is that prices have dropped. And interestingly, what's behind a lot of that is both on the oil side, a general economic slowdown and reduction in demand. Also counterbalanced with the fact that here in the United States, fracking has increased the amount of domestic production on oil and natural gas. All the investment that a lot of those companies put into developing those commodities are now hurting them because the commodity price has dropped. So they've been dropping off wells, trying to reduce production, but they're all carrying a lot of debt and they're kind of hurting at this point. But there is a glut of supply on the market and that's pushing pricing down. What it'll do to you relative to the development and running of your plants is that overall your operating cost will be lower. But if you are conversely looking to install a system, your return on that may be less because the fuel cost that you're offsetting is lower. Overall though, from a property management standpoint, low energy prices are great for you. How long they're going to stay where they are is a very big question mark. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But a lot of what we do is we help our clients plan out their future. So if you have a plant or you're just general building operations and you have, well, hopefully some form of a strategy on how you buy energy. If you buy it from the utility, as they are your supplier, and it's Con Ed here in New York, whether it's electricity or natural gas, you are pretty much paying whatever the market price is. Now that means that in the wintertime, natural gas prices can get very high and you'll get exposed to those. Anybody who was on Con Ed during the polar vortex saw that in their bills and it killed you. Conversely though, if you look at your bills and you were with Con Ed now or even going back a few months, you'll look at your bills and you'll think, this is a joke, it's the lowest number I've ever seen. Because you're now seeing very low numbers in the index, the floating market, the market that Con Ed is buying on your behalf. If you move away from Con Ed and you use a supplier, like you would if you're doing dual fuel and you guys are all dual fuel, you have an oil supplier. You can also have a supplier for your natural gas and your electricity. The great value of doing that is that when you have a supplier that's a third party, you don't have to do what Con Ed is doing. You have the ability, if you want to float with the market because the prices are going down, you can do that. If you want to fix the cost of your energy for a period of time to protect yourself from potential high prices, you can do that too. And that's actually what we do for our clients, is we look at what's going on in the marketplace and we recommend hedges for them, when to fix, when not to fix, and a lot of it has to do with how you run your operation. So how you run your real estate is budget sensitive, being on a Con Ed rate, while it can be low when prices are low, it can also surprise you and blow your budget unexpectedly. And the most important factor that moves the market, particularly it can be here in New York, that would affect your index pricing, is the weather. And the polar vortex is the perfect example of that. Let me see if I have that in the chart. I don't. But it only takes actually 2-3 weeks of abnormal temperature weather to move the marketplace here in New York. So if you remember the polar vortex, we had cold weather over a long period of time. Matter of fact, it was extreme, but it actually inverted the amount of natural gas in the storage system in the United States from about neutral to a negative 50% below normal. And it took us a long time, about 1.5 years, to recover that deficit. This summer, the temperatures are expected to be well above normal. Right now, prices are very soft. We have a decent-sized surplus of natural gas in the system in the United States, roughly 20% above where we normally are. But it's all affected by the weather. And we have that surplus because of an economic slowdown, but also it's been so mild the early part of this winter. So the period where we would be burning the highest amount of natural gas, we haven't been. We've been burning a whole lot less. And that has helped to bring up the storage supplies and to keep pricing low. As we go forward, the temperature risk will always be something worth watching. And when you're buying energy, you want to be looking forward into what it is you need to achieve for how you run your business. Just some interesting points that I've included here, which will kind of give you a snapshot of where the market is overall. We are at multi-year lows on pretty much every commodity, electricity, natural gas, and fuel oils. Demand is generally low, both economically and weather-driven, although this weekend it's going to be really cold. Someone told me that next week it's supposed to be spring-like. So as long as that trend continues, it means that prices will stay soft going into the spring. And the next period to watch out for, what we're looking for our clients, is what could potentially happen this summer. And even though general costs are very low, if you watch any of the energy market prices here in New York, if you look at the map forecast for the summer in New York, it's expected 40% above normal. That doesn't mean 40% temperature-wise, but the likelihood of above normal temperatures through the summer is 40%. If some of that should come to be, and we haven't had this the last few summers, if everybody kind of remembers, they've been pretty mild. We're kind of due for one. That if we have a string of weeks, anything beyond 3 days is almost considered an event by Con Ed in terms of temperature. That's a heat wave, 3 days above 90 degrees, or 3 days. But as we look at what's going to happen potentially in the summer, and if that forecast holds true, there's a risk there, and it's something to protect yourself. Where the current market prices here, I gave you a little table, current energy cost comparisons. If you look at the bolded numbers, and these are rough market numbers, you don't shop with these. It's to give you an idea about where the prices are for commodities right now. And I gave you a cost at the burner tip, which basically means your actual delivered cost. So, and in that shaded column, I converted everything to therms. So it's apples to apples comparison between the fuel oils and natural gas. And if you can see, they're all very close, with number 4 being a little bit cheaper now. They're so close that it pretty much doesn't make a difference. You're in a pretty much neutral standpoint between switching and fuels. Going forward, it's hard to know that in the long term, will that change, or how will that change? A lot of it's going to depend on what happens in the oil markets and what happens in the natural gas markets. How we got to this place, particularly with oil, there's that big chart with the blue. That actually just shows you the future price of a futures contract for New York Harbor number 2 oil, and you can just see the decline that we've seen over the last few years. It's obviously really steep. Declining roughly from $2.85 to about $1 over the last 18 months. We do have, just some other important facts here, we do have access to biofuel in that All the fuels now have 2% biofuel mixed in. That's a New York standard. You can also buy higher levels of that biodiesel. I am not the person to explain what you have to do to your equipment for biodiesel. Those guys are also here in the room. But you do need something special to be able to burn that. And environmentally, you're doing something good in that you are not burning as much fossil fuel and the pollutants are less. Interestingly, the price forecast for oil, and this is based on the federal government, which everybody has to shade with some rose-colored glasses in some degree. They are projecting that over the next 3 years, the price of oil will rebound about 40%. But you have to remember that's 40% from a very low, like $1. So roughly, I did give you a chart here. It's actually on the back that just shows you that the forward curve based on the federal government showing that, you know, there is some expectation, according to them, for that market price to come up a bit. And probably some of that goes back to what I said earlier about the fact that domestically, a lot of the fracking gas has been shut down because it's not economically viable for the owners. As they shut that down and we start to burn down supply, if demand increases at all, they will eventually bring those back online, but there will be a price increase that goes along with that trend. And I think that's pretty much the government's view of where fuel oil is going to go. Not really an enormous impact, I think, in a dual fuel situation. You will probably find natural gas will kind of continue to outperform and definitely be a cleaner burning fuel if you're interested in the environmental side of that. But I think we're looking generally at pretty favorable pricing. If you've been buying fuel for a while, you'll remember, you know, $3 or $4 per gallon. We're not going to see those for a while. We'd have to have a major event for that to change. In regard to natural gas, I mentioned the storage system. Some of you may not be familiar with the fact that in the United States we have a very large storage system for natural gas. It serves the purpose of creating a buffer for supply for us. We burn so much as a country in electric generation, industrial use, and largely heating demand in the winter that we don't produce enough on an as-needed basis. We need a storage system to serve as a buffer. So when the market moves, one of the largest indicators are where are we relative to storage. And this actually also has the impact on electric prices. And the tie-in for that is so simple. The electric generators set their price of their electricity based on the cost of natural gas. It is the price-setting fuel for electricity. So when prices go up and down, they are moving on the natural gas market, and they're moving on local constraint of electricity. That's kind of like the 30,000-foot view of it. So when we frequently talk about natural gas, it's always impacting electricity. So if there's a good supply of natural gas and the prices are down, electricity is likely to follow. Matter of fact, if any of you were with Con Ed during the polar vortex, you would have noticed in the middle of winter you got some very high electric bills. The reason for that is the direct correlation between the cost of natural gas and the cost of electricity, okay? Having a supply agreement with a supplier, like a fixed price, if you had one through that period, you were protected from that. You've already bought your supply in advance at a fixed price. One of the ways in which having a supply contract can allow you to manage your commodity in a better way. Just relative to the process, I'm not sure if any of you, or we can do raise hands, are any of you familiar with the process of buying electricity or fuel oils or an RFP process, or is that usually somewhere else in your operation? You can raise your hands, or not. Okay, that doesn't count. It's a process actually that you don't have to be a rocket scientist for. It does help to have some experience with it. The contracts can be a little complex. They're not common sense, and it takes a certain amount of understanding of the energy business. That's one of the reasons I have a job. Thank God for that. But the reality is that it's a tool that if you're spending any reasonable amount of money on, it's worth the investment. Particularly if you need to protect your budget, or because otherwise you're on Con Ed or the utility, you're going to be paying a floating rate. And I probably, and I won't go into it. If anybody wants to talk about how to buy energy, that's what we do, and I'm glad to talk about it. Just relative to kind of summarize where we are for dual fuel purposes, we're in a very favorable place in terms of the overall pricing for running your plants. Having a good strategy going forward in terms of your supply is always a good idea, because even though right now we're at a very low place, it won't stay there, because that's what history tells us. So if seeing your unit price go up and down a lot is an issue for you, or potentially an issue for you, looking at having a supply strategy is a good idea. And I am also going to mention, I'm not sure if it came up earlier here, but there is a very, very large incentive program right now in Brooklyn and Queens for the installation of cogen. For some of you may be already familiar with it, but there is what we call a load pocket in Brooklyn and Queens, where there is not enough transmission capability of electricity in a large section of Brooklyn and Queens. So Con Edison, the Public Service Commission, and the New York Independent System Operator are all behind trying to improve that situation. One of the ways is by having incentives for cogen, which would mean, very much like you're doing with your plants with dual fuel, you're going to offset some of your electric by generating it yourself, and at the same time, it's cogen, generating heat, hot water, steam, whatever you need for your overall processes in your building. By combining the two together, there's a certain efficiency in cogen, but the key thing for the infrastructure of New York is you're going to offset some of the electricity that would have to otherwise come through the Con Ed wires and could cause problems when we have periods of high demand, like this coming summer, which could possibly be. So if anybody wants some information on that program, Bright Power, we actually are working with our clients on a number of these. And if you want to talk to any of our people or talk to the other engineers here, I'm sure they know about it. I do have some information on that if you want it, and I'll leave the flyers in the back. And if anybody has questions, I'm always here to answer them. Sure.
The current energy costs, you have 98 cents per therm to the burner tip for natural gas.
Okay, if you could repeat the question, please.
Yeah, the 97 cents, yeah, that's like about $9 a decatherm. That includes Con Ed.
Including delivery.
That includes, yeah, burner tip would always be at the fire. So in the case of natural gas, that's the commodity at the rough price for the commodity itself. Natural gas also has a delivery component, not Con Ed delivery. It's called basis transportation. It's that general number with the commodity price and Con Ed delivery. The important thing to recognize, though, is that your basis price can vary significantly based on your accounts, the size that they are, and when you're burning your natural gas. If it's strictly a heat account, you're going to burn more in the winter. That basis price is likely to be higher because there's more constraint on the pipeline system in the winter period with high demand. If it's an account where you're also doing hot water off that same system, you're going to have some summer usage. You're going to be offsetting some of the winter peak, and your weighted average for your basis will be lower, if that makes any sense to anybody. Hopefully it does. But that's how the burner tip is ideally there to kind of give you the sense about if you were going to buy them, how do they compare apples to apples to apples.
And I think it's this fear of this confusing pricing system that I think keeps many buildings in one place. So even having a dual fuel burner, that the moving back and forth, how will that bump them out? Or like say they have a firm contract for natural gas that's about to expire, and now they're in fear of it's going to expire. Expire.
Well, your selection between interruptible and firm is something that's determined with the utility. You have to obviously have dual fuel. There's a number of different interruptible rates. A lot of them depend upon the one you want to select in terms of how you're going to operate your building. There are a number of them, both Con Ed and Nat Grid, where they tell you when to interrupt, and that's a system support function. You get a lower cost delivery rate from the utility for the benefit to the system of being interruptible. You can also do voluntary interruptible, where you can do it on your own schedule. So if you want to do it for economic reasons alone, like shifting, you can do it that way too. Your supply contracts get a little more complex, and sometimes you're reconciling supply you're not using with your supplier and issues like that. It gets a little more complicated, but that's essentially how it functions. The interruptible delivery rate was at issue at the last Con Ed rate case, which was a number of years back. They've kind of shaved some off of it, so it's not quite as beneficial as it used to be, but they need it in place in order to support the system, so the standby rates are there. Can I talk about the Con Ed rate case?
Well, absolutely, because it's the fear of that that keeps people like a deer in the headlights.
Yeah, I wear another hat beyond Bright Power,
Please talk
which
about that.
is, I'm the executive director, they gave me a new title, executive vice president of the New York Energy Consumer Council. What we are is a collection of the largest real estate businesses and some of the service companies that provide services, hi Peter, services to them. But one of our biggest things that we do is we challenge Con Ed on the rate cases. And if any have seen in the news, only a couple weeks ago, Con Ed announced that they are filing for new rates. They do this periodically. They go to the Public Service Commission and they tell them, they file a case, it's actually a legal case, saying we want more money, all right? And they're asking for about $2 billion in increases, electricity and natural gas over the next 3 years. The New York Energy Consumer Council, what we do is we have an attorney and we are an active participant in that case. So we fight to make sure that Con Ed's not getting more than they deserve to get. There are a few other entities that do that job, but I think generally the public doesn't even know that that exists. They may know there's a rate case, but they don't know that there's anybody working in their regard in those rate case processes. And that is something the NYECC does. If anybody's interested in knowing more about what we do, you can get me. I'll be glad to direct you there. The increases they're looking for are very large. We're talking in the 9 to 13% range, depending electric, natural gas. They won't likely get those increases. Like in any negotiation, they start with, I want everything, and we say, maybe not that. So it is a long process. But it is going to be setting the rates for likely the next 3 years. We've been very fortunate in that there's been some economy of scale over the last couple of years, and the rates have been frozen, which has been pretty good. We don't know where they're going to end up at the end of this, but your delivery bill is what we're talking about. So on the supply side, you have options. You can stay with the utility, you can go with a supplier. On the delivery bill, I know sometimes you feel like you're helpless, but the truth of the matter is there are some voices chiming in on the other side of that delivery bill. So I just want to share that with you. If anybody's interested in learning more about that or talking about procurement, I'll be here. Yes. The delivery rate is the same.
Oh, okay, I'll repeat the question. So if you buy natural gas from other than Con Ed, with the extra charges you find paying, you might as well be with Con Ed, you found or you believe? Is that the question? Okay, so that's...
It may seem that way, but the reality is that the cost is the same, except for the fact, for a few things, there are things that you are not getting charged for on your delivery bill when you're with a supplier. The sales tax, you don't pay on your delivery bill. There's also a few of the components in the tariff that are paid for through the supplier. So those components, they basically shift from the utility to the supplier, is a way to think about it relative to the commodity. But it is not that, even though it may seem that way, like you moved and all of a sudden your bill is high, it's not. The rates would be the same. There is an interesting thing, and this is anecdotal. Don't tell anybody that My own insight into it is I've noticed that when it appears as though sometimes when the commodity price gets expensive, Con Ed finds a way to lower their delivery rate, so that the overall cost on those customers who are with them is not so terrible at the point. Otherwise, they would be really big. And then what happens is that the market comes down. Like in the winter, you might see delivery rates go down, even though they probably shouldn't be. They make it up sometimes in the spring, and which is something I actually don't believe. I don't know for sure that they do it. It just seems to be anecdotally that they might. But if it is something to do, they probably shouldn't. I can understand why they would do it. They would do it because they don't want to scare people with gigantic bills in the middle of winter that they have a problem paying. But unfortunately, if you're with supply with a third party under a fixed price, it makes your total cost numbers look really funny because the Con Ed unit rate is variable, a little too variable. And we've seen that a lot in the last year, if anybody's seen that. So, any other questions?
Okay, and so I'd just like to throw out to anyone in the audience before this morning is over, who is a third-party supplier, please tell us, what is the benefit, because we do want to know. Obviously, there's plenty of third-party suppliers, and there are benefits to it, so we should hear what that is. So.